Find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and settle in. Some stories end when the sun comes up. Others stay with you long after you've left the woods. Tonight, you'll hear 3 chilling encounters from people who ventured just a little too far into places where something was already waiting. So take a deep breath, listen closely, and welcome to Echoes in the Dark. I tell this story often, not because I don't remember it. I remember every single second of it with the kind of clarity that only comes from real fear, but because telling it means I have to go back there, even just in my head. But I've been seeing posts lately from hikers planning trips into the deep Appalachians, into that part of the range, and I can't stay quiet anymore, so listen carefully. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't a ghost story you'll forget by morning. It's a warning. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that 3 years ago, I was a 26-year-old who thought he knew the mountains. I'd grown up in western North Carolina, right on the edge of where civilization stops pretending to care about you. My grandfather had taken me hiking since I could walk. I knew how to read weather and cloud formations, how to find water by the sound of it, how to set up camp in 30-mile winds. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't stupid. At least that's what I told myself. The trip was supposed to be a solo backcountry trek. 9 days, roughly 40 miles of trail, threading through a section of the Pisgah National Forest that very few people visit. Not because it's inaccessible. It's actually not that difficult to reach, if you know the old logging roads. People just don't go there. Nobody could ever really explain why when I asked around. I got shrugs. I got vague gestures northward. I got one old man at a bait shop outside of Canton who looked at my map, pointed to the section I'd circled, and said, real quiet, "That's the Warden's country." Then he went back to watching his fishing line like I hadn't said a word. I asked who the Warden was. He didn't answer. I went anyway. The first 4 days were perfect. Autumn had just cracked open the canopy, red and gold and that deep bruised purple that only Appalachian maples get. The air smelled like cold creek water and leaf rot, and something faintly sweet that I couldn't identify, like overripe apples left in the sun. I made good time. I saw deer. I slept hard and dreamlessly under skies, so clear I felt like I was floating in the stars. On the 5th day, I found the cabin. It wasn't on my map. That alone should have told me something, because my map was a proper USGS topo, not some tourist brochure. Old structures usually show up. Hunting camps, ranger stations, survey markers. This one wasn't there. Not so much as a dotted line. It sat back from the trail in a hollow between 2 ridges, half swallowed by decades of rhododendron and Virginia creeper. The logs were black with age, but solid. Whoever had built this thing had built it to last. The roof had been patched more recently with green metal sheeting that caught the gray afternoon light. Someone had been maintaining it. The door was unlocked. I know what you're thinking. And yeah, I went inside. It was a single room, a wood stove, a cot with a wool blanket folded neat as a hotel bed, a table, a kerosene lantern, a shelf with a few rusted cans of food. And on the table, weighted down by a smooth, dark river stone, was a piece of paper. The paper was new, white, clean, like it had been placed there recently. I picked it up. At the top, in handwriting that was precise and unhurried, the handwriting of someone who had all the time in the world, were 2 words, Warden's Rules, and beneath that, a numbered list, 8 rules. I'm going to read them to you now exactly as I read them then, because I memorized them. You memorize things that scare you. Rule 1, you may sleep in the cabin for 1 night. You must be gone before the light fades on the 2nd day. If you are still inside when dark comes on the 2nd night, do not open the door for any reason until morning. Rule 2, do not whistle after sundown, not a tune, not a note, not a breath of one. If you hear whistling from outside, do not whistle back. Rule 3. If you look out the window and see someone standing at the tree line, do not acknowledge them. Do not wave, do not speak. Turn around and do not look again until morning. They will be gone by morning. Rule 4. The wood stove burns well. You may use it, but do not burn anything you found outside. No fallen branches, no leaves, no bark. Only the wood already stacked inside. Do not ask where it came from. Rule 5. If the lantern goes out on its own, relight it immediately. Do not spend more than 30 seconds in the dark. If it goes out a second time, leave the cabin at once. Regardless of the hour, regardless of the weather, walk toward the sound of water and do not stop walking until sunrise. Rule 6. You may eat from the cans on the shelf, but if you open a can and the smell is wrong, not spoiled, but wrong, in a way you cannot explain, close it, place it back on the shelf, and do not eat anything for the rest of the night. Rule 7. Sometime between midnight and 3 in the morning, you may hear a sound like a child crying in the woods. It is not a child. Do not go outside. Do not call out. Do not make any sound at all until it stops. It will stop. Rule 8. In the morning before you leave, fold the blanket the way you found it. Leave the stone on the table. Take nothing from the cabin. If you have left anything behind, anything at all, do not go back for it. And at the bottom of the page, in the same calm, deliberate handwriting, the warden thanks you for your cooperation. I stood there for a long time holding that paper. The rational part of my brain was already constructing explanations. Some local eccentric owned the cabin. This was his way of keeping trespassers in line through superstition. Half these rules were probably just practical. Don't stay too long, don't use green wood that might not burn right, don't let the lantern run out of fuel. The crying in the woods was probably a fox or a bobcat. Anyone who'd spent time in these mountains knew how wrong an animal could sound in the dark, how human it could sound. The rational part of my brain had a lot to say. But I'd noticed something else, something the rational part was working hard to ignore. The lantern was lit. I hadn't lit it. It had been burning when I walked through the door, steady and quiet, like it had been waiting for me. I almost left right then. The light was still good. I had 2 hours before dark, maybe more. I could hike back to the main trail, find a camping spot, pretend I'd never found the hollow. But it was getting cold. The kind of cold that doesn't mess around. The kind that comes off the ridge and gets inside your sleeping bag and makes you lie there shivering and counting the hours until dawn. The wood stove was right there. The cot was right there. The cabin walls were solid. I stayed. I reread the rules twice more. I lit the stove with the split wood stacked beside it. Dry, seasoned hardwood, oak and hickory, good wood. And I told myself I was only following Rule 4 because it made practical sense, not because I actually believed anything was watching to make sure I obeyed. I ate some of my own food. I didn't touch the cans. I kept the lantern full and burning bright. Around 9 o'clock I heard the first one. Whistling. Not close, not loud, but unmistakable. A slow, wandering melody coming from somewhere out in the dark beyond the tree line. It wasn't any song I recognized. It moved through the notes like water moving through rocks, finding its own path, unhurried. My lips pressed together almost before I decided to do it. Rule 2 was already in my body before my brain had processed the sound. I didn't whistle back. I didn't even hum. I sat by the stove with my knees pulled up, and I listened to that sound moving slowly, slowly around the perimeter of the cabin, like something following a fence line. It circled the cabin twice. Then it stopped. The silence after it was worse. At some point I must have drifted off because I snapped awake and the lantern was flickering. Not from a draft. The air in the cabin was perfectly still, but the flame was shrinking, guttering, and I was already on my feet and reaching for the matches before I was fully awake. 20 seconds, maybe 25. The flame caught on the new match and the light came back up and I stood there breathing too fast, counting the shadows to make sure they were just shadows. They were. Just shadows. I did not let myself look at the window. This was harder than it sounds. Human beings are wired to look at windows in the dark. We're wired to check. Something in the hindbrain insists on knowing what's out there. I sat with my back to the glass and I read the same 3 pages of the paperback I'd brought about 15 times without absorbing a single word, and I kept my eyes inside the room. I almost made it to midnight without looking. Almost. It was the reflection that got me. I caught a flicker of movement in the black surface of the wood stove's iron door. The stove had settled into a low burn, and the metal was polished enough to show a warped, dark reflection of the window behind me. And in that reflection, at the edge of the tree line, there was a shape that was the right height for a person, a shape that was not moving. I turned around. I know I turned around. Rule 3 says do not acknowledge them, do not look again until morning. But my body turned before the rule could stop it, some reflex older than language, and I looked directly at the tree line. There was nothing there, just trees, just dark, just the wind moving the branches in a way that could absolutely explain a shape that looked like a person if you were tired and scared and alone. I turned back to the room. I didn't look at the window again. The crying started at 12:40 by my watch. Rule 7 had told me it was coming, and I had believed it in the abstract way you believe in things you've read about but never experienced. The way you believe something when you're safe and it's daylight. In the dark, in the cabin, in the hollow between the ridges, I believed it differently. It started low, like a sound almost too quiet to identify. A thin, reedy sound that could be the wind, could be a branch, could be anything. But it shaped itself the way sounds do when they're being made by something deliberate, and it became crying, a child's crying, high and broken and desperate. The sound of a child who has been crying for a long time and has not been found. My chest cracked open like a hollow tree. I am not a parent, I have no children, but I am a human animal, and that sound reached directly into the oldest part of me, the part that makes a person sprint toward a cry in a parking lot, that makes a person throw themselves between a child and a moving car without thinking. That sound was engineered for response. Whether it was made by something that understood what it was doing or something that had simply evolved to exploit exactly that frequency in exactly that way, I cannot tell you. I held my hand over my mouth. I dug my fingernails into my palm. I focused on the lantern flame, and I did not make a single sound, and I did not go to the door. The crying moved around the cabin the same way the whistling had. Slow, patient, like whatever made it had nowhere else to be. It went on for 40 minutes. Then it stopped. The silence afterward wasn't the same silence as before. This silence felt satisfied. I did not sleep again. When the light through the window shifted from black to the dark blue that means dawn is considering its options, I stood up and I folded the blanket the way I'd found it. Corners tucked precisely, folded in thirds. I left the stone on the table. I patted down every pocket, checked every compartment of my pack. I was not going to be the person who violated Rule 8 over a granola bar wrapper or a forgotten bandana. I was thorough. I was careful. I walked out of that cabin without looking back. I found the creek in 20 minutes, followed it downhill, and by the time the sun was fully up, I was back on the main trail with the hollow behind me and the weight of the night lifting off my shoulders one slow ounce at a time. That's when I reached for my camera. I'm a hobbyist photographer, have been since college. I bring a camera on every trip. A mirrorless body, nothing fancy, but it matters to me. It's how I remember things. It's how I prove to myself I was actually somewhere beautiful. It wasn't in the outer pocket where I always keep it. I stopped walking. I checked the main compartment. I checked the hip belt pockets. I unloaded half my pack onto a flat rock beside the trail, going through everything with hands that were starting to shake. Because I already knew where it was. I had set it on the shelf beside the rusted cans the night before when I first came in, just to lighten the load on my shoulder while I read the rules. I had forgotten it. In all the fear, in all the sleeplessness, in all my careful checking and rechecking, I had forgotten it. I stood on that trail for a long time. If you have left anything behind, anything at all, do not go back for it. That's what the rule said. That's what it said in plain, unambiguous language written by whatever had decided to be generous enough to give me a rule set in the first place. The camera had my grandfather's name engraved on the bottom. He'd given it to me the year before he died. I had 260 photos from this trip on the memory card inside it. I went back. I told myself it was fine. It was full morning. The sun was up. Whatever the hollow was at midnight, by the logic of everything the rules had implied, the daylight hours were neutral, safe. The rules were about the night. I told myself that. The whole way back up the ridge, the whole way through the rhododendron, the whole way down into the hollow. The cabin looked different in daylight, smaller, more decrepit. The green metal roof was patched with rust at the edges, and the Virginia creeper had gone brilliantly red overnight, draping down over the door frame like something decorative and deliberate, like something that had been arranged. The door was still unlocked. I pushed it open. The blanket was still folded on the cot, exactly as I'd left it. The stone was on the table. The lantern had gone dark. The fuel burned down to nothing in the hours since I'd left. The rusted cans sat on their shelf. And there was my camera, right where I'd set it, sitting in the shadows at the end of the shelf, like it was waiting for me to come back and make a mistake. I crossed the room in 4 steps, I grabbed it, I turned around, and the door was closed. I had left it open. I had absolutely left it open. I could still feel the coolness of the morning air that had been coming through it, could still picture the rectangle of pale gold light it had let into the room. The door was closed now and the cabin was dim, and the only light was what leaked through the one small window on the south wall. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the latch. From somewhere directly outside, not from the tree line, not from across the hollow, but from directly outside, right on the other side of the door, no more than a foot from my face, came a sound, not the whistling, not the crying, something I had not been warned about. It was breathing, slow even, patient breathing, in through what might have been a nose, out through what might have been a mouth, the breathing of something very large that was in absolutely no hurry at all. My hand stayed on the latch and did not move. I understood in that moment, with the kind of clarity that only arrives when the body has stopped negotiating with the brain, that the rules were not a list of superstitions. They were not folklore. They were a contract. And I had broken Rule 8, had walked back into this hollow, back into this cabin, back into whatever arrangement governed this place. And now I was standing on the wrong side of that contract with my hand on a door that had something breathing on the other side of it. The breathing did not change rhythm. It did not speed up. It was not angry exactly. It was just present, the way a very large thing is present, the way something is present when it has decided to wait. I don't know how long I stood there. My watch said 11 minutes, but time had gone sideways, and I'm not sure my watch was right. I know that at some point my legs started shaking. I know that I pressed my back against the door, not to hold it shut, but because my legs needed the support, and that was the only wall close enough to reach. I know that I prayed. I'm not a religious person. I want to be clear about that. But I stood in that cabin with my back against the door, and I prayed to anything that was listening. And I specifically and deliberately said out loud, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry, I broke the rule. I'm leaving now. I'm going to open this door and I'm going to walk out and I won't come back. I'm sorry." The breathing stopped, not gradually, not with any kind of retreat, no footsteps moving away, no rustling in the undergrowth. It just stopped, the way a sound stops when the thing making it decides to stop making it. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, from somewhere far off, from up near the ridgeline, distant enough to feel almost polite about it, the whistling started. The same slow, wandering melody, moving through the notes without hurry, no particular direction, just there, reminding me that it knew where I was. I opened the door. The hollow was empty. Morning light lay across the dead leaves in long yellow strips. The rhododendron moved gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. There was nothing in front of the cabin, nothing at the tree line, nothing visible in the shadows between the trunks. I walked out of that hollow faster than I have ever walked anywhere in my life. Not running. I was afraid to run, afraid that running was an invitation of some kind, afraid of what chasing instinct might awaken in whatever was pacing me through the trees, because it was pacing me. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. The whistling had stopped once I was moving, but I could feel it the way you feel a car driving slowly behind you on an empty road at night. That specific primal awareness of something large keeping your exact pace just beyond the boundary of your vision. It followed me to the creek. At the creek it stopped, and I don't know how I know that. I just know that when I stepped off the bank and into the cold water and crossed to the other side, something lifted. The way pressure lifts when you step out of a building where something terrible happened into open air. Just gone. Like I'd crossed a line that had been drawn long before I was born. I stood on the far bank and I breathed. I put both hands on my knees and I breathed until my legs stopped shaking. Then I followed the creek downhill until I hit the main trail, and I did not look back once. By the time I reached my car, I had lost 3 hours I couldn't account for. My watch said 2:17 in the afternoon. It should have said 11, maybe noon. I don't know where those hours went. I don't know if I want to. The camera was in my jacket pocket. I could feel it there, a hard rectangular weight against my ribs. I haven't looked at the photos from that trip. I've tried twice. Both times I got as far as the folder, saw the thumbnail of the last photo I took, the ridgeline shot the afternoon before I found the cabin, and I just couldn't, because I know what comes after it on that memory card. I know I set the camera on the shelf when I walked into the cabin and read the rules. And I know that I left it there all night while things circled outside, and the lantern guttered, and the crying moved slow rings around the walls. I don't know if cameras record things other than light. I don't know if I want to find out. I've looked for the hollow on satellite maps, on historical surveys, in old forestry records. I've talked to 2 separate academics who specialize in Appalachian folklore and 3 rangers who've worked that section of the forest for decades, and nobody knows what the Warden is. Some of the folklore researchers had heard of similar notes found in backcountry cabins. Always different rules, always the same format, always the same phrase at the bottom. The Warden thanks you for your cooperation. There are accounts going back to the 1930s in old Civilian Conservation Corps journals. There are rumors older than that, from the Cherokee who lived in these mountains long before anyone else did, about a keeper of the deep hollows. About something that had made an arrangement with the land, that it could stay and feed and persist as long as it followed certain courtesies. The people who entered its territory were extended the same offer. Follow the rules and you are under its protection. Break the rules and you are not. I broke Rule 8. I went back. And whatever the Warden is, it could have collected what it was owed. I was alone in its cabin, on the wrong side of the contract, with my back against a door and 11 minutes to think about all the things I'd done wrong. It let me go. I have no idea why. I've spent 3 years turning that over and I have no answer. Maybe the apology mattered. Maybe the contract has fine print I couldn't read. Maybe it was simply not hungry. Maybe it prefers the waiting. For now, if you're planning a trip into the deep Appalachians, into any part of the range where the trails get thin and the hollows get quiet and the map stops accounting for things, and you find a cabin that shouldn't be there, with a lantern already burning and a folded blanket on a cot and a stone-weighted paper on the table. Read it carefully. Follow every rule. Check your shelf before you leave. And if you leave something behind, leave it. Whatever it is, whatever it means to you, whatever name is engraved on the bottom of it. Leave it. The Warden is patient. It will wait longer than you can. This happened about 2.5 years ago, late September. Me and my friend Derek, we'd known each other since college, both of us into backpacking, the kind of friendship that's built almost entirely around being cold and tired together in beautiful places. We'd done maybe a dozen trips together. Smokies, Linville Gorge, a bad one in the Whites that we still joke about. This was supposed to be an easy one. 3 days, 2 nights, a loop trail up in a section of national forest in the Virginia Appalachians that neither of us had done before. Moderate difficulty, well-marked trail, according to the app. Nothing that should have gone wrong. We started Friday morning. The drive-in took longer than expected. The last 6 miles were gravel forest road, switchbacking up through stands of hemlocks so thick, the light went green and underwater looking. We joked about it. Derek said it felt like driving into a postcard that hated us. I didn't think much of it at the time. You say things like that on every trip. The mountains always feel a little theatrical when you first arrive. The trailhead had one other car in the lot, an old Bronco, faded red, parked at an angle like whoever left it hadn't cared much about where the lines were. No one else around. The first 6 miles were everything you want from an Appalachian trail in September. Golden light slanting through turning leaves, the trail dry and well-graded, switchbacks opening up every mile or so into views that made us stop and just stand there for a minute. We made good time. We talked about nothing. Work, a show we were both watching, whether Derek's truck was going to make it through one more winter. Normal stuff, the kind of conversation you only have when nothing's wrong yet. We reached our first camp around 4 in the afternoon. A flat bench of ground above a creek, well used. You could tell from the cleared dirt and the old fire ring that other people camped here regularly. We set up the tent, got a fire going, ate, and watched the light go from gold to blue to that deep mountain black that swallows everything past about 10 feet from the flames. That's when we heard it the first time. It was a knock. Not a branch falling, not a tree creaking. A knock. 3 of them, evenly spaced with the particular hollow quality of wood striking wood. It came from somewhere up the slope behind our camp, maybe 50, 60 yards out, past where the firelight gave up. Derek and I looked at each other. He laughed it off first, said it was probably a woodpecker, even though it was full dark, and woodpeckers don't really do that. I said maybe it was someone else camping nearby, hitting a stake into the ground. We let it go. You let a lot of things go in the woods at night because the alternative is lying awake, cataloging every sound until morning. And nobody wants to do that on night one of a 3-day trip. It happened twice more before we went to sleep. Same 3 knocks, same rough direction, though it seemed to move. Once from up the slope, once more from across the creek. We didn't talk about it the second or third time. We just both got quieter, fed the fire a little more wood than we needed to, and eventually crawled into the tent. I didn't sleep well. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters for what happened the rest of the trip. I was already tired and a little wired before anything had really happened. Derek slept fine. He told me in the morning he hadn't heard anything else after we went into the tent. I had twice more in the deep night. Same pattern, 3 knocks, far off, patient. I didn't mention it. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself the same thing you're probably telling yourself right now, listening to this, that wood settles, that animals make strange sounds, that fear amplifies things that would seem ordinary in daylight. I want you to hold on to that thought because I held on to it for a lot longer than I should have. Day 2 started fine. We broke camp, refilled water at the creek, and pushed on toward our second site, a ridge camp about 8 miles in, supposed to have a great view for sunset. The trail got rougher, more elevation, more deadfall to climb over, fewer of the cleared, obviously trafficked sections from the day before. Around midday, we passed something that I didn't think much of at the time, but think about constantly now, a tree just off the trail with bark stripped away in a long vertical column, 6 feet up, maybe more, exposing pale wood underneath. At first glance, it looked like bear damage. Black bear's claw trees, mark territory. That's completely normal in these mountains. But the marks weren't claw marks. They were too even, too deliberate, almost like something had been scraped down the trunk in a single smooth motion, over and over, in the same spot, until the bark gave way. Derek touched it, ran his hand down the exposed wood. He said it felt warm, which didn't make any sense given the temperature that day. And when I touched it myself, I felt the same thing. Not hot, but warmer than the air around it should have allowed. We didn't talk about that for very long either. We took a picture. We kept walking. I still have that picture, by the way. I've looked at it more times than I'd like to admit. We reached the ridge camp around 5:30, with just enough light left to set up before the colors really started going. And the view was worth it. Genuinely, it was one of the best overlooks I've ever camped at. Ridgeline after ridgeline rolling out blue and hazy toward the horizon. The kind of sight that makes you understand why people fall in love with these mountains in the first place. We ate, we talked. The knocking didn't happen that night, or at least not that we noticed. And for a while, I actually let myself relax. Then, somewhere around 11, Derek sat up in the tent and asked if I'd heard that. I hadn't been asleep. I said yes. It was breathing, not wind, not an animal settling somewhere nearby. A long, even, deliberate breath, in, then out, coming from just outside the tent wall, close enough that if it had been a person, they'd have been standing right against the fabric. We didn't move. I want to describe what that's like, lying in a tent in the pitch dark with something audibly breathing 18 inches from your head, because words don't really do it justice. Your whole body becomes a listening device. Every cell goes quiet and waits. I remember being acutely aware of Derek's breathing next to mine, too fast, too shallow, and being terrified that the thing outside could hear the difference between our breath and its own, and that the difference mattered somehow. It breathed like that for, and I know this sounds impossible, but I checked my watch afterward, almost 6 minutes. Then it walked away, not ran, not scurried, the way an animal flees when it's startled. It walked with a slow, heavy, 2-footed gait, footsteps spaced the way a person's are spaced, moving off down the slope away from the tent until the sound faded into the general noise of the night. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. Eventually, Derek said, very quietly, "We're leaving in the morning, not finishing the loop, straight back to the car." I agreed immediately. There wasn't a single part of me that wanted to argue. We didn't sleep again that night, not really. We lay there with our headlamps off to save the dark for our eyes, listening, both of us pretending for the other's sake that we were calmer than we were. Around 3 in the morning, the knocking started again. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more, this time close. Close enough that it felt less like a sound happening somewhere and more like a sound happening at us, like a greeting or a warning. We didn't respond. We didn't speak. We just lay there with our hands gripping the edges of our sleeping bags until the gray light of dawn started to leak through the tent fabric, and only then did either of us move. Packing up that morning, we found something that I still can't explain and don't try to anymore. Around the perimeter of our camp, not randomly, but in what looked, when we really looked at it, like a rough, deliberate circle, were small stacks of stones. 3 stones each, balanced, not stacked carelessly, but placed with what felt like intention, the kind of careful balance that takes real patience to achieve in the dark, without light, without us hearing a single footstep or scrape of stone on stone. There were 9 of them, evenly spaced, all the way around our tent. Derek counted them twice, out loud, like saying the number again might change it. It didn't. We didn't touch them. We didn't take pictures, which I regret now in a strange, completely irrational way. Like the pictures might have explained something or might have been the wrong thing to take. I genuinely don't know which. We just got our packs on as fast as we could and started moving. The hike out felt different from the hike in. Same trail, same trees, same golden September light coming through the canopy. But everything felt watched. I don't have a better word for it. Every snap of a twig off trail made both of us flinch in unison. We stopped talking almost entirely, which for 2 people who'd spent a full day before chattering about nothing, said more than either of us wanted to admit out loud. About 4 miles from the car, we passed a small side trail neither of us remembered seeing on the way in. Unmarked, narrow, leading off into a stand of dark hemlock, and standing maybe 30 yards down that trail, just at the edge of where the light gave out, was a shape. I want to be careful here because this is the part of the story where I've lost people before, the part where it sounds too much like a campfire tale and not enough like something I actually lived through. But I'm telling you what I saw and what Derek saw too, because we talked about it immediately afterward and our descriptions matched detail for detail, which is the part that still keeps me up some nights more than the shape itself. It was tall, taller than a person has any business being, though my brain kept trying to negotiate that down to something reasonable, some trick of the trees, some optical effect of shadow and distance. It was not moving, it was simply standing there facing us at a distance and an angle that made it impossible to make out detail. Just a column of darker dark against the green-black hemlock shade. Neither of us said a word. We didn't run. I think some animal logic in both of us understood that running was the wrong move. The way you instinctively know not to run from certain things, even when you've never been told the rule. We just turned, calmly, deliberately, and kept walking down the main trail at the same pace we'd been walking before, not looking back, not speeding up, every nerve in my body screaming to do both. We didn't hear footsteps behind us. We didn't hear knocking or breathing or anything at all. Just our own boots on the trail and our own breath, loud as a drum in my ears. We made it to the car in just under 2 hours, the fastest 4 miles either of us has ever covered with full packs on. Here's the part of the story that I think about more than any other part, and the part where I genuinely don't know what to tell you because I don't fully understand it myself. When we got back to the trailhead, the old red Bronco was still there. Same angle, same spot, exactly as we'd left it 2 days before. There was a film of pollen and dust across the windshield that you only get from a vehicle sitting untouched for a good while. More than 2 days worth, if I'm being honest about what that kind of buildup actually looks like. Derek pointed it out before I could. We stood there for a minute just looking at it. We asked at a gas station about 20 minutes down the mountain, mostly because neither of us wanted to keep carrying the question in silence. The guy behind the counter, older, weathered in the specific way that means he spent his whole life in those mountains, asked which trailhead. We told him. He nodded slowly like he already knew and said that car had been sitting there a long while, belonged to a hiker who'd gone up solo back in the spring and never came back down. Search and rescue had gone in twice. Found nothing. No body, no gear, No sign at all, except, and he said this part quietly, like it cost him something to say it, except for a ring of small stacked stones they'd found around a flattened patch of grass on the ridge, which nobody on the search team could explain, and which everyone had quietly agreed never to bring up again once the report was filed. 9 stones, he said. He remembered that detail specifically because his nephew had been on the search team and wouldn't stop talking about it for months afterward. I didn't tell him we'd found the same thing. I don't know why I didn't tell him. I think some part of me understood, standing in that gas station with the bell over the door still jingling from when we'd walked in, that saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. That it would stop being a strange thing that happened to us in the woods and start being a pattern. A pattern with a missing hiker in it, and a Bronco that never moved, and a ring of stones that meant something nobody wanted to say out loud. We never finished that loop. We've talked about going back exactly once, about a year later, half joking, the way you joke about things you have absolutely no intention of doing. Neither of us has been back to that section of forest since. I still have the picture of the stripped tree. I look at it sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, and my mind goes back there on its own without my permission. I don't know what walked around our tent that night. I don't know what stood watching us from that unmarked side trail, or what knocked on wood somewhere off in the dark for 2 nights running. Patient as anything I've ever encountered, like it had nowhere else in the world it needed to be. I know that whoever, whatever, and was up on that ridge before us, the hiker who owned that Bronco, never came back down. But we did. I think about how close that margin might have been more often than I'd like to admit. So if you're planning a trip into the deep Appalachians, into the kind of section of forest where the trail thins out and the cell signal disappears and the trees get old enough to remember things, and you hear 3 knocks in the dark, don't answer them. And if you wake up to something breathing just outside the tent wall, don't move. Just wait it out. And if you ever see stones stacked in a ring around your camp in the morning, 9 of them perfectly balanced that weren't there the night before, pack your things. Walk out at the same pace you'd walk on any ordinary day. Don't run. I've been trying to write this down for almost a year now. I've started it maybe 6 or 7 times, typed out a few paragraphs, then closed the document and walked away. Not because I can't remember what happened. The opposite. I remember it the way you remember a car accident. Not as a story with a beginning, middle, and end, but as a series of images that come back without warning at the worst possible times. The smell of ponderosa pine in the heat, a Coleman lantern throwing orange light across the dirt, and a face just at the edge of that light that I will spend the rest of my life trying to unsee. So I'm writing it down. I'm saying it out loud, because if it stops someone from spending a night like the one I spent, or stops them from making the choice I almost made at the end of it, then it's worth reliving. The plan was simple. 3 days, 2 nights, a solo trip up to the Lynx Lake area, a reservoir in the Prescott National Forest, up in the Bradshaw Mountains, elevation around 5,500 feet. If you've never been to Prescott, you might picture Arizona and think saguaro and heat shimmer and flat red earth. The Bradshaws are different. Up there, it's ponderosa pine forest. Big old trees with bark the color of burnt cinnamon that smells like vanilla in the sun. It's cooler, it's quiet. It doesn't look like most people's idea of Arizona, which is exactly why I loved it. I'd been up there twice before as a day hike, never camped. I was looking forward to it. A quiet few days with a book and a fishing rod and nothing urgent anywhere on the horizon. I got to the trailhead on a Friday afternoon in late July. The parking lot had 4 or 5 other cars. The trail around Lynx Lake is popular enough that I wasn't worried about being completely isolated. There'd be other people nearby, other campers. The comfort of knowing civilization wasn't too far if something went wrong. That comfort is one of the things I've thought most about since. I set up camp at a spot I'd scoped on my last day hike, a flat, open area maybe 150 yards back from the lakeshore, sheltered on 2 sides by a stand of ponderosa with a clear sight line down toward the water. Good ground, good drainage, far enough from the trail to feel private without being completely tucked away. The first evening was perfect, the kind of evening that reminds you why you do this. Gold light sliding down through the pines, the lake going flat and mirror still as the wind died, a mule deer picking her way along the far bank without seeming to notice or care that I was there. I made dinner, got my fire going with the deadfall I'd collected, watched the stars come out over the Bradshaws one by one until the sky was fully lit. I saw one other person that whole first evening, a man, fishing, down at the shore, just a silhouette at that distance. Ball cap, waders, rod in hand. He wasn't paying any attention to me, and I wasn't paying much attention to him. I saw him pack up around dusk and head back up the trail toward the lot. I thought nothing of it. I went to sleep around 10. I slept soundly. The second day was similarly quiet. I hiked the perimeter trail, found a spot along the water to fish for a couple of hours, caught and released 2 small bass, ate well, watched the clouds build and dissipate over the mountain to the south, without ever delivering the monsoon rain that July usually guarantees up there. I should have left after the second day, not because of any sign I'd missed, not because anything felt wrong. I've thought about this a lot, whether there was something in those first 2 days that I should have read differently, some warning I walked past without recognizing it. I don't think there was. I think sometimes things just happen, and the story we tell afterward about how they were inevitable is just our brain trying to find a structure that makes the world feel less random than it is. I should have left because 3 days of anything is enough, but I was relaxed and the weather was fine and I had food left, so I stayed. The third evening was when I first noticed him. I was back at camp just getting the fire started for dinner, when I had the feeling you get sometimes in the woods. The specific atavistic feeling of being watched. Every hiker knows it. Your animal brain picks something up before your conscious mind does. Some shift in the ambient information of a space, and the hair goes up on your arms and you go still without deciding to. I looked up toward the tree line, and there was a man standing at the edge of the pines, about 60 yards out, watching me. Not passing through, not hiking. Standing with his arms at his sides, completely still, just watching. My first reaction was embarrassment, honestly. The embarrassed flush of having someone appear while you're doing something private. Though I was just building a fire. Nothing remotely private about it. It was a reflex. A second later, the embarrassment shifted into something else, something lower and more serious, and I straightened up and looked at him directly. He was tall, very tall, 6'4", maybe more, thin in the way that looks less like leanness and more like something is wrong, like thinness that has gone too far and become its own category. He was wearing dark clothing, dark pants, a dark long-sleeve shirt, which struck me as strange for July at elevation, even in the evening cool. No pack, no visible gear of any kind. He wasn't moving. He was just looking at me with a quality of attention that I can only describe as absolute. The way you might look at something you've been waiting to see. I raised a hand, a wave. The instinctive, social, this is friendly gesture you make when a stranger appears unexpectedly near your camp. Because the alternative, ignoring him or saying something direct and confrontational, felt more alarming than the greeting. He didn't wave back. He tilted his head to one side, slowly, like he was trying to hear something, and then he took one step backward into the tree line and was gone. I stood there for a while after that, not long, 3 minutes, maybe 4. My fire had caught and was crackling, and the light was starting to fail, and the completely ordinary forward momentum of camp life reasserted itself the way it does. You eat, you tend the fire, you go through the motions. I did all of that, but I didn't relax again. Some switch had been thrown and it didn't throw back. I told myself the rational things. Hikers pass through camp all the time. People stop and look at a fire, at a tent, at another person in a space they're moving through. The stopping and watching without waving back was strange, sure, but people are strange. Shy people exist. Socially awkward people exist. People who haven't spent enough time around other humans to remember how the social choreography goes exist. The tilt of the head, though. I couldn't explain the tilt of the head in a way that landed on the comfortable side of strange. I pulled my camp chair close to the fire, and I ate my dinner, and I watched the tree line, and I tried to read, and I watched the tree line, and I tried to listen to a podcast, and I watched the tree line. Around 9:30, I got up to hang my food bag, a habit I never skip, even in areas where the bear activity is low. The hang spot I'd picked was about 30 yards from my tent, a decent throw over a high branch in one of the bigger ponderosas. I had my headlamp on. I was making the throw, trying to get the cord over the right branch, doing that thing where you miss twice and have to recoil the line, half annoyed with myself. On my third throw, my headlamp swept across something as I looked up. He was standing between 2 trees, maybe 25 yards away, watching me. Not 60 yards this time, 25, close enough that the edge of my headlamp beam caught him, just the near side of his face, one shoulder, one long arm hanging at his side, close enough to see his face. I'm not going to describe it in detail because some part of me still doesn't want to. What I'll say is this: there was nothing supernatural about it. Nothing monstrous, nothing that defied explanation, nothing that would have looked wrong in a photograph. It was a human face, but the expression on it. I have thought about how to put this into words for almost a year, and the closest I can get is this. He looked at me the way you might look at a meal. Not with hunger, exactly. With something quieter than hunger. With the patient, settled, completely calm expression of someone who has already decided how something is going to go and is simply waiting for the sequence of events to complete itself. He wasn't agitated. He wasn't wild-eyed or frantic or any of the things you might expect from someone whose behavior was this far outside any normal range. He was calm in a way that was worse than any agitation would have been. I said loudly, loud enough for my voice to carry, loud enough to sound certain even though I was not. I said, "I can see you. Back away from my camp." He didn't back away. He smiled. Not a social smile. Not an embarrassed, caught in the act smile. A slow, deliberate smile that reached his eyes in a way that made my stomach drop out completely. And he tilted his head again. The same gesture as before. That slow sideways tilt, like something listening to a frequency no one else could hear. Then he took 2 slow steps to his left and moved behind the trunk of a ponderosa and was gone from my headlamp beam. I ran back to my tent. I want to pause here and tell you what I did next, because I think it's important, and because I think if you ever find yourself in a version of this situation, the choices I made in the next 20 minutes matter more than anything else in this story. I did not wait to see if he came back. I did not try to go to sleep. I did not try to rationalize my way out of what I had seen and decide it wasn't as bad as it felt. I broke camp, not calmly, not completely. I left the food bag hanging because I wasn't walking back under those trees for anything. But I got the tent down, I got my pack loaded, I got my headlamp on and my bear spray in my hand, and I got on the trail. It was dark. It was full dark, close to 10 o'clock, and hiking out alone in the dark on an unfamiliar trail is exactly the thing every experienced hiker will tell you not to do. But the calculation had shifted. The thing I was afraid of was no longer the trail or the dark or a turned ankle on a route I couldn't see. The thing I was afraid of was behind me, in those trees, smiling. The trail back to the parking lot was about 1.5 miles. I walked it in 22 minutes, which for 1.5 miles in the dark with a full pack is faster than I'd like to admit. I kept the headlamp on, kept the bear spray uncapped, and I did not let myself run even when every single part of me wanted to, because I understood, some clear, functional part of my brain understood even through the fear, that running would tell something behind me, things I didn't want it to know. Halfway out, I heard footsteps in the trees parallel to the trail. Not an animal, not a deer. I know what deer sound like moving through underbrush, the delicate, nervous picking of hooves. These were long, slow, 2-footed steps, keeping almost exactly my pace, maybe 30 yards off in the trees to my left. I didn't change speed. I didn't acknowledge the sound. I kept my headlamp forward, kept my breathing as even as I could manage, and I walked. The footsteps stayed with me for about 1/4 mile, then they stopped. I don't know why they stopped. I don't know if he reached some boundary I couldn't see, or lost interest, or simply decided, with that same settled, patient calm, that tonight wasn't the night. I don't know, and I've stopped trying to. The parking lot had 2 other cars besides mine, both empty. The lot itself was dark, no lights. I got to my car, got the doors locked, and sat there in the driver's seat, shaking hard enough that it took me 4 tries to get the key in the ignition. I drove down the mountain without stopping. I called the Prescott National Forest Ranger Station the next morning. I told them what had happened, the watching, the camp, the face in the headlamp beam, the footsteps on the trail. The woman I spoke to was professional and calm and took down everything I said. At the end, she asked if I'd gotten a good enough look to describe him. I told her I had. I gave her the description. The height, the build, the dark clothing. There was a pause on her end that lasted just a beat too long. She asked if he'd said anything at any point. I told her no, not a word. Another pause. She told me they'd had 1 other report from that area in the past month. She didn't give me details. I'm not sure if that was policy or just caution. but she said they were aware of a person matching that description who'd been seen in that section of forest more than once. She told me I'd done the right thing by leaving. She said it in the specific, careful way that people use when they mean it more seriously than they want to let on. I asked her if anyone had been hurt. She said she couldn't speak to that. She took my contact information. No one has followed up. I've been back to Prescott once since then, not to camp, just to drive up, sit in a coffee shop in town, look at the mountains through the window. Some part of me needed to see that the place itself was still just a place, that the ponderosas and the red granite and the high blue sky were still there and still indifferent, the way nature is indifferent, that what happened up there was a thing that happened in a place, not something the place itself was. I mostly believe that now. Mostly. I still camp. I want to say that clearly because I don't want this to be a story that ends with someone deciding never to go outside again. The woods are not the enemy. The mountains are not the enemy. Most of what you will ever encounter alone in the backcountry is beautiful and will cost you nothing except the energy to walk to it. But I camp differently now. I trust my instincts faster. I act on them sooner. When the hair goes up on my arms and that ancient part of my brain says something is wrong, I don't spend 20 minutes rationalizing it. I don't give myself time to talk myself out of it. I don't wait for a second data point or a third or a fourth. If you're heading up to Prescott, to Lynx Lake, to the Bradshaws, any of it, please go. It's beautiful country. It deserves to be seen. Just don't camp alone if you can help it. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next journey into the unknown. Until then, keep the fire burning, and remember, some echoes fade away, others answer back. Thanks for listening to Echoes in the Dark.